Welcome back to Doing Diaspora. I'm delighted to be joined by who started off as a colleague, but now a very close friend, Loksan Harley, based out of the UK. Loksan is an independent migration and development expert with extensive experience working with the United Nations, governments, non-profits, and private sector clients in research, project management, capacity building, and technical assistance across Europe, Africa, and Asia and the Pacific. He holds a BA in economics from McGill Universities and an MSc in public policy and management from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, where he also lectured on migration policy. But perhaps his greatest achievement is having the common sense to follow an incredible football team called Tottenham Hotspur. So, Loksan, it's great to see you, buddy. Most importantly, how are you?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. It's good to be on Doing Diaspora, and yeah, I think the bio, when you read it out loud, the bio sounds pretty good. It sounds a lot more impressive than the reality. So I guess I've got that to live up to.
No. Look, and I mean, just so the listeners know, I remember the first time I met Loksan. I think it was in Brussels, right? We were doing some work together a couple of years ago, and I had a 4 hour delay of a flight in Tunisia, and I was tired and I was cranky. And I said, the guys I'm meeting here better be nice. Because it's dramatic, it could get messy.
And you were disappointed.
Yeah. So when we were preparing for this, I told Loksan to have something related to Tottenham behind him or near him, and this is my contribution to the journey. We'll come to Tottenham in a moment, but look, let's get into the diaspora stuff, and most importantly, a question I ask everybody at the beginning is, what kind of brought you to the diaspora engagement world? Was it something personal? Was it professional? Did it happen organically? But, why diaspora work for you, and kind of what brought you
to it? It's difficult to say, really. I think, as you know, I've been a consultant in this field or in the migration field for about 6.5, 7 years now. And diaspora, I've been a generalist, so I've worked across the migration field, from issues of control, coercion, human trafficking, migrant smuggling, right through to migration and development more broadly. And so it really came, I guess, as the demand shifted, or as part of the demand from various clients. I worked initially on migration and development issues where when we talk about migration and development, diaspora is always present within that in different ways. So then it was quite straightforward, with all due respect to the field, of course, but it was fairly straightforward to then pivot a little bit towards diaspora related issues, or to get familiar with those issues, from having had that migration and development background. So yeah, it's really demand from clients, personal interest as well, and I'm sure we'll come to that, and having a bit of that contextual knowledge as well.
So you mentioned the word demand there. Do you see that increasing? Because, Kingsley and I are internal optimists. We don't know whether we're lying to ourselves or not, in the sense of the demand increasing. So do you see that in the field? Because I know a lot of your work, and look, for the listeners, one of the things that's always impressed me about Loksan, and we might come to your career trajectory in a moment, but having the courage to do what you do and make that decision at quite a young age is quite refreshing, and we've talked a lot about, how to do consulting probably a bit more conscientiously and with a bit more kind of meaning and impact. So first of all, I want to say well done on that. Not many people have the courage at your humble age when you did begin this journey to do it. So ironically, given where the world is, I think with the job losses, that skill set will be in greater demand. So back to that question of demand on the diaspora, and do you really see that playing out in the field, or what's driving that, if it is, or?
It's pretty difficult to say, because we all work in our own little bubbles, and I can certainly say from my perspective that it seems to have grown a lot. Interest in the subject seems to have grown a lot quite recently. At least that has manifested itself in more projects for myself. I mean, not to blow toot my own trumpet, but more projects for myself compared with other topics. Right. And in that sense, interest seems to be growing. And I think also that there is a lot of interest in it because I think it's not so well understood. And also I think there's a lot of I think diaspora engagement for most, at least when we talk in the context of migration more broadly, it does have this, in my view, much more of a positive connotation. And it's also something which can cross-cut a lot of other interesting topics. So, as you and Kingsley, you guys work a lot on things like diaspora philanthropy, and then when we talk diaspora, it then goes into things like, it goes into networking, it goes into alumni engagement more broadly. So I think a lot of people hear the term, think it's positive, and want to do more. And also, there's just such a latent potential of diaspora engagement for a lot of countries, particularly in lower income countries, who have historically sent a lot of migrants overseas, who are now doing quite well for themselves. So yeah, that's how I see it. But it is quite difficult to have that perspective when working, day to day on projects in a very concentrated way like you and I do.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head, and one of the things that I'm quite passionate about, and probably people are fed up with me saying it or giving out about it, is, we need to invest in it as a sector itself, but I genuinely don't think it's there at the moment, and look, I'm a boring academic at heart. When people say to me, what do I mean by that, I said, there's nowhere you can really go learn this at an elite level. There's no, if you look at the wider field of diaspora studies, and my academic friends will give out here, but is it where it needs to be? Probably not, so they're the kind of nuts and bolts issues of it. So let's get into
and just sorry, just to interject and pick up on something that I think you say a lot. I think you've talked previously about how in terms of the research out there, the academic field, there is more work that needs to be done. And I think I noticed that in terms of with diaspora engagement, in contrast, or at least compared with other topics within the migration field, probably does lack to some degree that evidence base, that the kind of research and evidence that you need to develop good strategies and policies and programs and so on.
Yeah, no, look, I completely buy into that, and I think as well, look, if people are interested, and kind of the brainchild behind Doing Diaspora in many ways was to give kind of up and coming young voices a platform to really kind of share their expertise. And we wrote something on LinkedIn together, it must be close to a month ago at this stage. But one of the things that really impressed me about your own input into that, buddy, was just very much rooted in common sense. Common sense is at a premium in the 21st century, but particularly in diaspora engagement. So I think if people want to check that out, they can have a look at it. So let's get into the nitty gritty. You've been kind of doing, as you mentioned, it was a relatively straightforward pivot into more diaspora work, because that's where the client was going and where the interest was. So you've been doing some really interesting work. I'll let you fill people in on what you're doing, but I know you've been doing, for example, kind of case studies. I think it's 8 case studies in Western Africa, in terms of diaspora engagement. Is there anything in that, coming back to, I suppose, the research component of it and just the knowledge building in it, was there anything that really surprised you? Anything that you kind of, was the commonalities, differences, anything that kind of jumped off the page to you doing that work that you're allowed to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, all of it will be published anyway, and well, a lot of it is kind of just looking at what's out there already. So well, brief background, if it, for those who don't know, yes, as you said, I've been doing these case studies for 8 West African countries, so looking at what each of those has been doing on diaspora engagement. And I guess it's surprising that so many of the challenges are very common, or surprising but unsurprising. I mean, that's also comes, a bit of common sense, similar contexts and so on. So it's interesting, at least, to see that they have a lot of these countries have very common challenges, and also interesting to see that they're coming up with very common solutions too. So at least a brief analysis from just thinking out loud is that a lot of countries are doing the same things, and then a few are a bit stand out. So when you look in the region of West Africa, we see Ghana and Nigeria kind of doing very exciting things, and then the rest of the countries, I mean, they're just as a disclaimer, I didn't really look at Mali and Senegal because those weren't my responsibility. So I know they're also doing some interesting things too. But just out of the 8 countries that I'm looking at, certainly Ghana and Nigeria seem pretty stand out. And then there are interesting little ideas and initiatives emerging from elsewhere in the region, but those two seem to be doing things bigger and a bit more interesting, in my view at least. And then a lot of the other countries are doing pretty standard things. So just to unpack that a little bit, in terms of like common challenges, for instance, it seems like a lot of countries are trying and having challenges and some successes with, for instance, trying to federate their associations a bit more. And what I mean by that is a lot are setting up these, umbrella organizations, quasi-state umbrella organizations like the, Beninese the High Council of Beninese Abroad, the High Council of Guineans Abroad, High Council of Togolese Abroad, and so on and so forth, following on from some of the successful examples in places like Mali. So there is this kind of joint, common will and desire to speak to the diaspora as one, which comes, of course, with its own opportunities and challenges. A lot of states seem to be grappling with issues of dual citizenship and the diaspora vote. And of course, we see these issues across the world, outside the region too. And a lot of countries, and then coming to what a lot of countries seem to be doing, it seems to be very much, at least in the West African context, and this extends to other places as well. But just thinking back at this, case study project that I've been doing, we see a lot of diaspora forums. That seems to be like a standard thing that countries like to do, is do a forum. We see what else? Setting up a directorate for blah 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 abroad. A directorate, a diaspora directorate, usually within their foreign ministries. So as to give them a bit of a focal point for the diaspora. Another thing that I just one more thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure I'm blanking on a lot of things here, but just one thing that comes to mind is that, generally speaking, and I'd be curious to hear your views on this as well, Martin. Generally speaking, I feel that countries are looking more at, when they think diaspora, I feel in general they're thinking immigrants, their migrants abroad, their nationals abroad. Which and of course, when we talk diaspora, we're also talking about the later generations too, and those who don't possess citizenship, which is what makes diaspora such a powerful term, or has the potential to make such a powerful term. So that's sort of my observation, and of course there are exceptions. Certainly Ghana and to a lesser degree Nigeria have looked at how to engage the historic African diaspora, across the world, and those who are not citizens, those who are later generation, including African Americans for the case of Ghana. But by and large, it seems to be countries are focusing on their nationals, which I think is missing a trick. But that's where we're at.
Yeah, look, I think, to quickly kind of come back at that, the age-old question of diaspora engagement: define your diaspora. Who are they, where are they, what are they doing? And I think my gut instinct from working globally on it, and this is something that we learned quite quickly in Ireland. I give an example. There's about 130,000, I think, or something like that, Irish-born people in the US. There's 39.5 or 34.5 million or something like that tick the Irish ancestry box in the US household kind of survey. So my point would be, if you take that narrower definitional parameters, then you're excluding a lot of potential developmental capital. And I speak more developmental capital in terms of the countries where we would have done historically a lot more work. I think what we need to do in diaspora engagement as well is to get a lot more developed countries taking it very seriously. I think that's where some significant potential is. And you have countries such as Denmark that are beginning to really kind of pick their ears up on this. Australia doing some interesting stuff as well. So look, I think you're spot on, and I think you know, I always get nervous when I'm working with governments when they come up with those narrow definitions, because you know it becomes an exclusionary topic then, you know, rather than an inclusive one. So I think if you can steer people more towards the inclusive part of it, and you know, I'll always go back to the Irish example, because I'll shamelessly promote Ireland wherever I go. You know, the Irish diaspora policy has a beautiful line, and people often scan over it, but I think it's a very powerful line in this stuff. It says, a diaspora policy will not create a diaspora. It will give them a sense of a community, right? So there again, that's a very inclusive concept. And look, I won't mention the diplomat who told me, but there was an Irish diplomat once who told me, you know, if you feel Irish, you are Irish. That's good enough for us. So that one. So I think you're touching on something important there. You mentioned as well, you know, the vote and dual citizenship. Look, the vote is a very sensitive topic in Ireland. The Irish diaspora can't vote, you know, and I think I'm a big believer in diaspora. If you can depoliticize it, you know, I think that's where the magic of it is, you know. So, but then diasporas are, some of them have been created because of issues that are inherently linked to politics. So you have to be careful of it. So look, I think that there's a lot to unpack there, as you said, but you know, the next two questions might help us to get into that in a sense. And the first of those questions is, you know, because I know a lot of your work is with government, so we'll come to that in a moment. But, you know, do you see, you know, any just basic general good principles of practice for diaspora engagement, not just relating to government? Because as you mentioned as I mentioned in the introduction, you've worked with governments and kind of private sector and different organizations and international organizations. So do you have any sense of, you know, just maybe 2 to 3 really good basic principles of good practice for diaspora engagement?
Yeah, I think, well, you sort of hit the nail on the head as well when you talked about being inclusive. So I think that is a kind of a big do, right? Don't be narrow in your definition. You know, do be inclusive. And I believe, you know, from my experience, that when there are concerns, and often very valid and legitimate concerns, about why countries don't like to be inclusive, I think there are always ways to address them. So, you know, when we talk about the diaspora vote or dual citizenship, you can give dual citizenship while restricting the diaspora vote, for example, if that is your concern. And I think that is to some degree a fair concern. You know, even British citizens lose the right to vote after a certain number of years abroad, and many other countries, you know, have that system in place. So, but you can, there are other countries that allow citizenship but restrict the vote. There are countries that restrict dual citizenship, but for instance, provide some sort of diaspora citizenship or diaspora identity. You know, countries like India or Ethiopia, you know, you can get some kind of status which allows you to do things in your country of origin, but you know, also restricts certain responsibilities and benefits that are reserved to nationals. So that's kind of one point. Another point I'd say is that diaspora engagement for governments is as much about doing as it is about not doing certain things. So in many cases, it's about government getting out of the way. Because diaspora, and as I think I heard on one of the previous episodes as well of Doing Diaspora, you know, diaspora in general care, and they want to do things. And sometimes government can be a facilitator. Sometimes a government can be implementer and should implement certain things. In other occasions, they should play facilitator. You know, Ireland's a great example, as I think you've mentioned previously. You know, in terms of supporting a range of different actors to do different things on diaspora. And then in other cases, government should stay out the way, or just simplify a few things. So just to bring that back into practical terms, the government, just by allowing the diaspora to access certain administrative formalities like other nationals do, could allow them to tap into a lot more of these different capitals that we've talked about. So if diaspora can open a bank account in their country of origin, then, and if they can invest in companies, if they can own shares, if they can access credit, right, these are really powerful things that can enable a lot of exchanges. You know, and as we'll, I'm sure, come to later, I've been a diaspora, a member of the Chinese diaspora in the UK, and a member of the UK diaspora in other countries. And I've returned to China, lived in China, and encountered a lot of barriers to doing things, which prevented me from investing and starting businesses and so on, and eventually you know, made it difficult to stay there long term. So I think removing barriers can be a very powerful kind of mindset. And we've also seen that, at least what struck me when I was looking at Niger, amongst these case studies that we're talking about, the Nigerian, so not Nigerian, Nigerian diaspora in Europe, with very little support, you know, organized their own diaspora forums. You know, the government organized theirs a couple of times, or I think the last one was quite a few years ago. But then the diaspora themselves in Europe organized meetings in 2016, 2019, and then got the support of government officials, you know, diplomats and so on. So a lot of it is about looking at where government has that added value, instead of just thinking, oh, we're a government and we want to do something on diaspora, so let's do a diaspora forum, you know.
I think you're touching on something incredibly important there, but I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because, you know, it's been driving me mental, to be frank, for a couple of years, you know, because there is, without question, you know, I think the new EU diaspora facility came up with a figure. I think there's over 100 countries now that have a ministry or a unit or a directorate or something like that on diaspora. And there has been a movement over the last kind of 4 to 5 years to create diaspora policies or strategies. You know, and they're all very well-meaning, you know, don't get me wrong, and I've been involved in some of them, you know, but the mechanics of what you just outlined, you know, that's how you create the environment to make this stuff work. Do you see a disconnect, you know, between the aspirations of the diaspora policies that are being created and then the actual basic mechanics of making that happen, you know, because you'll hear a lot of the debate around get remittances into investment, you know, get them back as investors, as you mentioned, you know, whatever it is, you know, but the nuts and bolts to make that a reality in most countries are not there, you know. So you're kind of half writing a policy saying to yourself, or being involved in a policy saying to yourself, this is really well-meaning, but so I don't know if you see that disconnect, or is it something that it just is that I'm have created in my own mind, but this might be the private sector guy in me, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think I share your frustration. I definitely see, especially from working, you know, with a lot of West African countries, not going to call anyone out specifically, but it takes so long, it seems, for a lot of countries to get a diaspora policy actually approved. And then when you actually look at what's in there, it's either kind of, well, this also comes down to making good policy, but it's either kind of just extremely abstract and broad, or overly specific, and then you come to find that none of the specific things have actually been done. I don't know, I'm of the opinion that it's good and useful for the government to state their intention about their vision and mission on diaspora engagement, you know, to set yourself a direction, to set the stage, to have a context. But it really, you know, the devil then comes down into the detail of what, you know, how to actually do those things. And yeah, there is a very big disconnect, and I think also countries don't necessarily, you know, issues of migration and diaspora are political necessarily. You know, it's so it's, I think countries don't always want to commit themselves to a specific vision, and then also, of course, there are issues of lack of capacity, you know, limited resources to do certain things. But you know, countries like Ghana have also shown that you can do a massive campaign like the Ghana Year of Return with quite limited resources, by activating a much broader network of partners. So that's sort of problem identification, solutions, waiting for you to come up with them, basically.
Yeah, we're waiting a while. Look, I think you're touching on something just incredibly important, because there's a missing element in this, and I've been thinking a lot about this during the pandemic, and we've discussed privately before, and I've always said I've taken a listening role during the pandemic rather than kind of getting out there and trying to speak too much, and I mentioned in the first episode with Kingsley, and I'm thinking about it again and again. This might be a very simplistic way of looking at it, but I'm thinking, who do we need to back to make this stuff really work? And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's a very important role for government in terms of stating the aims and the objectives and where they want to go with diaspora engagement. But even if you look at the stories coming out through the pandemic, it tends to be the diaspora nonprofits that have really been at that front line and doing some really creative stuff, whether that's, poverty alleviation, healthcare provision, whether it's about just wider community well-being, whether it's about now trying to put in place programs and projects to really, have an impact back home. So I'd love to get a sense from your research. One of the things I speak about quite a lot when I write is, what is the community infrastructure looking like? Right? Are the because a lot of diaspora organizations, we have to be very frank, they're run by people that are doing this in their spare time. They have very limited capacity. So you don't have that level of quality organization to really drive something forward. So do you see that as a missing ingredient as well? Or again, am I just kind of, because I've seen countries that do that well, and I've seen countries that just don't look at it at all. I'm saying to myself.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'll be quite upfront and say that I haven't worked a lot directly with diaspora associations myself, but certainly from what I've observed, well, as you've said, especially during COVID, when I've talked to some governments in recent weeks, and I've kind of said, okay, well, what's on the cards for this year on your agenda? And it's kind of like, oh, well, we wanted to organize a diaspora forum, but then because of COVID, it's just been postponed, and that's then full stop. Yeah. Whereas as you've highlighted, we look at a lot of diaspora organizations, and they've been extremely active, especially different diaspora organizations from different countries collecting funds to support COVID response in their countries of origin. So that's where it's that community infrastructure that is critical in diaspora engagement going forwards, and certainly we have to look at how to support that.
So I want to throw two words that you used back at you now, because it's the first time it's come up in all the sessions, and I think it's a topic we're going to hear more and more and more about, given where the world is, and that's UK diaspora. Because here's the punchline: you very rarely hear the word diaspora in the UK context. They call them expats, right? And
Brits abroad.
Brits abroad, yeah. Well, the image of Brits abroad, and McLaughlin.
Yeah, not that different from Irish abroad to some degree.
Yeah, but we just
do better PR.
We just do it in the Irish pubs in a bit of green, So look, genuinely, I'd love to pick your brain on that, because you share some of your own experience, and you mentioned you're part of a diaspora yourself, and not just kind of being British Chinese. Obviously, you have that duality, and you've lived it as a member of the UK diaspora and the Chinese diaspora. And we did a report. Not many people probably know about it, but Kingsley and I were involved in a report for then UK Trade and Investment about 5 years ago, I said 6 years ago at this stage, where they were beginning to look at this topic. Whether that was because of the political winds of the time, I don't know, in the sense of where they're going. But for me, it's one of the just no-brainer engagements to do for the British government at the minute. To really look at the people abroad and say, look, how do we put these people together in a collective movement? You need your friends. We won't go too much more into it. But so I'd love to get a sense of has that background that you have kind of informed, positively and negatively, just from your experiences or your work, and just some wider thinking about maybe, that idea of the UK diaspora, because look, privately between us, I think you could create a very, very strong niche for yourself there. I think they'll be looking at that question very seriously in the next few months.
Yeah, well, we'd hope so. I mean, notwithstanding the British government's infinite wisdom, I think they have missed a bit of a trick on that, and you know, our dear neighbours Ireland are putting us to shame really in terms of what they're doing on diaspora engagement and what we're doing. And I think, and here's why. I mean, it's when you look at, especially, you know, keep coming back to Ireland because it's so close and so successful on this topic. If Irish diaspora engagement and this sense that you can, you know, you're Irish if you feel it, or whatever you can say. If there's that, if a lot of Ireland's success in diaspora engagement is premised on getting that message out there, you know, because the global Irish, as you call them, you know, they extend very far around the world, and if it's about a little bit of Irish descent or just feeling Irish, you know, if you apply that to the British context, I mean, just think of that potential. You know, I've myself lived in Canada, and I certainly found that a lot of Canadians, you know, a lot of Canadians do have a bit of a link to the UK, and sometimes that is embraced, and other times it's embraced a bit less. But I always found that there is, in many cases, at least some sort of interest or fascination or curiosity about the country, and that's not being exploited. Whereas with the Irish, it is being exploited to great success. So I think all that to say that I think there is something to be done in terms of strengthening that link a bit, and we can, you know, I'm sure there are very good reasons why that hasn't been done, or why the government is treading carefully around it. And I think we do have this a lot of Brits have a bit of innate, you know, imperial guilt, or whatever you want to call it, about, you know, talking about Britishness, and talking about, you know, it's always conflated with notions of nationalism, whereas in the Irish context, I feel that it's been branded in quite a liberal internationalist way. So I think there's a lot of things to do, and there is work being done already, you know, especially in Scotland and Wales. You know, we've seen both state-sponsored and private sector initiatives, you know, Global Scots, Global Welsh, the Scottish Business Network. You know, they're already doing things because there is this demand for it, and there is a potential for it. The UK as a whole, I think, has by and large not shown itself to be embracing of this kind of broader global Brits community. And, you know, we've seen this as myself as part of the UK diaspora when I was living abroad for 10 years. You know, you lose access to the National Health Service at some point. You know, if you're not resident in the country, you lose access to the National Health Service. You lose rights to vote at some point. You can't really get a mortgage to buy property and things like that. So you know, these aren't problems that are just specific to the UK. You know, a lot of other countries face them too. But I think there is certainly a lot of potential there, and that also goes into this idea of, you know, at the moment, in the current political context, it would be advantageous to do that too, and to activate the different networks of friends that we're probably going to need going forward. So, and it also fits in well with this kind of global Britain vision that the government ostensibly has.
Look, I mean, look, I'm not saying anything out of turn here. I remember when we were doing that work a couple of years ago. It's an incredible brand. You know, no matter what way you look at it, if when you talk about Great Britain, you know, I bet you didn't think you hear me standing up for the UK in this call today. You know, but it is an incredible brand, and there's just a lot that can be done there. And I think, you know, the beauty of it is you know, not just that global Brit perspective, and there has been some research from the likes of Tim Finch a couple of years ago that looked at that, you know, but we also have to acknowledge what the British government and the UK government has done for diaspora communities in the UK. through the work of partnerships of DFID and Comic Relief, with the Common Ground Initiative and helping particularly African diaspora organisations in the UK. Very few governments do that, at the scale that they've done it. So they deserve recognition for that. And I think, like most things in life, opportunity often comes out of necessity. So
Yeah.
I think when this will bubble up, and I think the subtle shift, there's been a lot of debate in the UK, and you're closer to it than I am, so look, feel free to comment or not on it. Is obviously DFID and the evolving kind of institutional apparatus of international development, and probably linking it more to trade. That's the lens that this will fit under in terms of diaspora engagement, because similar to the UK, Ireland as well, we're doubling our global diplomatic presence. We're opening up embassies and consulates in places we've never been, and a lot of that is economic diplomacy. We need access to new markets. So to the victor of the spoils, as Andrew Jackson once said. So look, we're kind of coming into the crux of the matter now, and I want to bring you back to something that you said earlier that I think is incredibly important. And you spoke about the inherent, or maybe just the perception that diaspora is a bit more positive than migration at the moment. And you've been uniquely working in both fields, and it's something that I've always been nervous about trying to do. As you mentioned earlier, even with the research, when you talk about the migration development world, there's a lot of great researchers out there, a lot of great minds in it, and it's not my terrain. I'm never going to walk into it. Right? But you've hovered in between the two, and I'd love just to maybe just get your thoughts on that distinction between, maybe what diaspora can do for migration, or, what are the subtle nuances between the two? Because one of my kind of pet peeves when I'm listening to things, they just get used interchangeably, and there are very subtle differences between the two. So I'd love to get a sense of, when you talk about it being more positive, what do you mean by that? And more importantly, how do we communicate that message? Because, we have up to, and this might sound crazy, but up to before the pandemic, we had lost the media battle on migration. And I think, during the pandemic, we mentioned the NHS, you look at the doctors who were dying, the friends of mine that are working with the Libyan community, a Libyan doctor dying, an Iraqi doctor dying, there's something very powerful to be done now. So I'd love to get that idea of what you mean by that distinction, and hopefully some positive stories.
Sure. Well, I think what you usually say, or what I think I've heard you say before, is that migration and diaspora are cousins, right?
Yeah, like first cousins.
First cousins, yeah. So similar but different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think at the same time, in some ways, we don't want to just say that migration, or just say migration is about immigration either, which is what it is often seen as. So migration is about movement. It's about and there are a lot of the themes that we discuss when we talk about diaspora engagement, or themes of identity and belonging. They are very important themes in migration more broadly. So I think in terms of what I consider migration, I do see diaspora as part of it, but of course it does have a lot of its own particularities that need to be addressed, with due respect. I think diaspora, coming back to some of the things we were discussing previously, diaspora does allow you to talk about things in a more positive light. Yeah. Of course, we've both worked in countries as well where diaspora as a term is either not understood, considered academic, or sometimes has a negative connotation. But in general, when we talk about those who have gone abroad, in some contexts it can be negative, but in a lot of contexts it's quite a positive thing. And in terms of engaging them, from the perspective of the country trying to engage them, it's also often a case of, there is a strong business case for doing that. Whereas when people talk about immigration, especially in the European context, but also in a lot of other countries, in a lot of developing countries, it is often about, okay, how do we control that flow? So diaspora, I think, is quite helpful in providing that positive flip side to what a lot of people see as the negative aspects of immigration. And in addition to that, diaspora, I think, is a very fluid term, and that fluidity gives it a lot of power. When we talk about diaspora, it is all about belonging and identity, and it's very powerful in storytelling. Diaspora engagement a lot of that is about storytelling, and just like nations, really, nations are in my view, to some degree, stories that we tell. Yeah. So in that sense, diaspora engagement is this entry point to talk and tell stories about a lot of different things. So yeah, those are the main distinctions I've kind of come across.
Incredibly well said, buddy. Incredibly well said. I think one of the great emerging areas of interest in this topic is diaspora and nation branding. And not just nation branding, but place branding. And coming back to the UK, ironically enough, a lot of local authorities, through a friend of mine who runs a company here in Ireland, are beginning to look at that, and it's about education through technology. And that storytelling component about it, and how people think about you is incredibly important in today's age, particularly with the next generation coming through. They're a different beast, in terms of their emotions and their ethical awareness more than anything. So I think, I don't know if it will happen or not, but we put it on the radar, people. There was talks of doing quite a substantial diaspora and nation branding conference in the UK last year, but it just got sidetracked. So whether that comes back again with pandemic or not, I don't know. And I think power can be used for positive or negative, but I love the idea of diaspora as smart power, because it kind of, coming back to fluidity, power in the 21st century is through networks, it's through agency, and diasporas are inherently about agency and networks. So we need to do more about it. So look, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. The question I always like to close with is that crystal ball moment. But given that we have this commonality in question in terms of Tottenham, I'm going to ask you your crystal ball for diaspora engagement over the next 5 years, and then probably most importantly, your crystal ball for Tottenham Hotspur over the next 5 years, i.e., will we win a trophy?
Yeah, so the answer to the latter is yes.
Yeah.
No, well, yeah, it could be the League Cup or something.
I think the League Cup.
Yeah, we'll take anything at this point. Crystal ball for diaspora engagement, very difficult. I think a lot of countries, I think it is going in the right direction in terms of that awareness is being raised, and I think it's hard to remember that for a lot of countries, especially when we look in the African context, another thing that struck me when looking at a lot of the West African countries is that a lot started their diaspora engagement journey, really the turn of the 21st century, or in many other cases it started, in the 2010s even. At least in terms of actually starting to do things and having a head of state who really believes in it, which is also important. So it is relatively recent, whereas we've been having immigration policies for a very, very, very long time. So hopefully, I don't know. I don't really have a crystal ball, but I can certainly say what I hope for, and that's that there will be this grow. The awareness will continue to grow about the power of diaspora engagement, and about, especially when we talk about later generations. And hopefully we will move past some of these false dichotomies of for instance, we can't have dual citizenship because the diaspora, shouldn't vote because they don't, they don't live in the country, and things like that. I think are kind of false dichotomies for which there are already solutions, and there are examples around the world which show that you can address certain concerns and still get the benefits of full diaspora engagement or greater participation. One of my countries of origin, China, the official name of China, which a lot of people don't know, actually includes the overseas Chinese, right? The official name of China includes a character which refers to overseas Chinese. And there is this kind of strong sense of Chineseness, right? But there's no dual citizenship, and there have been some legislators, politicians, and others who have talked about dual citizenship, but they're not there yet, and it's something which has been so powerful for a lot of countries, and yet China, which for all the great work it has done on diaspora engagement, hasn't done it. And then, as you've said, the UK does support a lot of diaspora engagement work with the countries it gives aid to, but it doesn't seem to have yet reflected that understanding on its own situation, which is quite odd in a way. So hopefully some of these things we'll look back on and then see that as part of the kind of trend towards awareness on the topic. But that's my hope anyway.
Well, look, here. And I think, look, most importantly, I'm happy that we're winning a trophy. But look,
yeah,
I think you said something.
I also made that prediction about the trophy. I've made that pretty much every year of my life. So
never admit that publicly, my friend. But no, I think and it's important for people that may be listening to this to understand as well. That I think you said something that's just so incredibly rich and important. Is that this is relatively new. To a lot of countries and a lot of organizations that are trying to build it. People talk, and look, we've looked at historically the Chinese diaspora engagement model has been one of the best in the world. And when we talk about the big countries out there, take my country, we only began to have a policy apparatus realistically in 2004 with the establishment of the Irish Abroad Unit. And if you look at the historical trajectory of diaspora engagement, breakdown of the Cold Wars when it really kind of re-emerged, then it went dormant for a bit. And then, as you mentioned, kind of mid-2000 to 2010, you have this wider movement. So I think it's okay to say that there will be mistakes. Not everything's going to work. So look, from my end, my friend, look, I want to say thank you for your friendship and your collaboration over the last year or so. And I think it's on an upward trajectory in terms of the work that we'll do together. Hopefully, much more in the future. Is there anything we've discussed or haven't discussed that you would like to discuss? I always ask that people so they can try and get me in trouble. Or
I don't think so. I think I want to just congratulate you on this initiative to do this Doing Diaspora talks, and to have these conversations. And I'm certainly learning a lot from you, working with you, and enjoying the banter at the same time. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
No, perfect. And look, the final question, most importantly for yourself, because I know you have a lot of plans yourself that you want to share with people, and you have a lot of ideas coming out and content coming out along with the consultancy. How can people get in touch? How can they contact you? Is it LinkedIn, email? What's best for you?
Sure, that anyone can find me on LinkedIn, and also my website, my personal website, loksanharley.com. And trying to put out more as you know, Martin, it's been my goal this year to start writing more and doing more and speaking a bit more, because as consultants we do so much work that is just unpublished, and we're also working in such a focused way that often we don't reflect on the kind of broader learnings of what we're doing. And I think, yeah, as you're doing this series, it's important to share some of those things. So with that in mind as well, and as you know, I'm launching a podcast, which hasn't been launched yet, but if you stay tuned on LinkedIn or loksanharley.com, then I'm sure you'll find it at some point.
Perfect. Look, most importantly, my friend, have a great weekend. And for the people listening, I want to finish with this message. Well, one of as I mentioned earlier in the call, one of the greatest assets that I saw Loksan have was having the courage to make this career move quite young. And when people ask me about who we should be looking out for in terms of advisory work, research work, consultancy on diaspora engagement, I give them two names generally. One is Loksan and the other is Amira Ajeti. So keep going, buddy. Continued success and never look back.
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate it, and nice to be on the show.
Yeah, buddy. Thank you.